asked my parents if they took any comfort from the Nuremberg trials, which were going on for 4 of the 5 years we were in Germany until we got permission to come to Canada. I have no idea if they got any consolation from the conviction of dozens of the worst offenders. But of this I am very sure. They would have preferred by far that the sense of outrage that inspired the Allies to establish the military tribunal of Nuremberg had been aroused many years earlier, before the events that led to the Nuremberg tribunal ever took place. They would have preferred, I'm sure, that world reaction to the 1933 Reichstag fire decree suspending old portions of the Weimar Constitution, to the expulsion of Jewish lawyers and judges from their professions that same year, to the 1935 Nuremberg laws prohibiting social contact with Jews, or to the brutal rampage of Kristallnacht in 1938. They would have preferred that world reaction to any one of these events, let alone all of them, would have been, at the very least, public censure. But there was no such world reaction. By the time World War II started on September the 3rd, 1939, the day my parents got married, it was too late. Millions of lives were lost because no one was sufficiently offended by the systematic destruction of every conceivable right for Jews in Europe that they felt the need for any form of response. And so, the vitriolic language in venal rights abuses, unrestrained by anyone's conscience anywhere, in or out of Germany, turned into the ultimate rights abuse, genocide. I don't want to suggest for a moment that the Nuremberg trials weren't important. They were crucial. They provided juridical catharsis and were an heroic attempt to hold the unimaginably guilty to judicial account. And they showed the world the banality of evil and the evil of indifference. At Nuremberg, victims bore public witness to horror, and history thereby committed to memory the unspeakable indignities so cruelly imposed. And there is no doubt that some justice did in fact emerge in the aftermath of Nuremberg, and there are many connected dots of history leading to the present, of which we can be proud. We've made remarkable progress and are immeasurably ahead of where we were 60 years ago in many, many ways. But we still have not learned the most important lesson of all, to try to prevent the abuses in the first place. We have not finished connecting history's dots. All over the world, in the name of religion, national interest, economic exigency, or sheer arrogance, men, women, and children are being murdered, abused, imprisoned, terrorized, and exploited with impunity. Almost 60 years after the promulgation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we have still not developed an international moral culture which will not tolerate intolerance. The gap between the values the international community articulates and the values it enforces is so wide that almost any country that wants to can push its abuses through it. No national abuser seems to worry whether there'll be a Nuremberg trial later, because usually there isn't. And in any event, by the time there is, all the damage that was thought to be done has already been done. Where injustice is preventable, it should be prevented when first identified, not permitted first to create its human devastation before being held to account. We need to remind ourselves that it is not just what you stand for, it's what you stand up for. Intolerance is the world's fastest growth industry. Don't we have a moral and multilateral responsibility to confront rights abuses around the world? Shouldn't we be trying to find a principled way to decide when, where, and how to intervene to prevent genocide or mass murder or the annihilation of rights? Why hasn't the Holocaust, the single most outrageous crime in civilized history, created a desperate, unquenchable thirst for enforceable international norms that make intolerance intolerable anytime and anywhere they occur? What has kept the global community from liberating the Universal Declaration and the Genocide Convention from the inhibiting politics and parochialism to which they are tethered, so they're free to help create once again a civilized world confident and willing to provide a future of tolerance and justice for its children? a concluding story offering a child's perspective. It's taken from a book called Fragments, written by a Swiss man in his mid-50s. The book is now hopelessly mired in controversy over its authenticity, but the language and imagery remain compelling. The title of the book comes from the fragments of memories the author says he recovered in recent years, memories relating to the years he spent from the ages of around 4 or 5, he never knew how old he was, in Polish concentration camps. After the war, when the young boy was 10 or 11, he was placed in a foster home in Switzerland. The horror and brutality of the only life he had ever known left him totally unprepared for the civility of his new surroundings. School, in particular, was utterly bewildering. And hence this story about the day he was totally humiliated by his teacher in front of a giggling classroom when he was asked to identify a colored poster of the Swiss hero, William Tell, of whom, of course, he had never heard. "What do you see here?" the teacher asked. "Tell, William Tell, the arrow," they're calling from the benches. "So, what do you see? Describe the picture," says the teacher, who still turned toward me. I stare in horror at the picture, at this man called Tell. He's holding a strange weapon and aiming it. And he's aiming it at a child. And the child's just standing there, not knowing what's coming. I turn away. Why is she showing me this terrible picture? Here in this country, where everyone keeps saying I'm to forget and that it never happened. I only dreamed it, but they all know about it. "You're supposed to be looking at the picture. What do you see?" she asks impatiently. And I make myself look at the picture again. I see an SS man, I say hesitantly. And he's shooting at children, I add quickly. A gale of laughter in the classroom. "Quiet," barks the teacher, then turns back to me. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" And I can see that she's getting angry. "The hero's shooting the children, but what?" the teacher says fiercely. "What do you mean?" Her face is turning red. But it's not normal," I say, trying not to cry. "Who or what isn't normal here?" Now she's beside herself and shouting. I force down the lump in my throat and I try to concentrate. But I can't interpret what's going on. What's this about? "It's not normal because..." I'm stuttering again. "Because why?" she says loudly. "Because our block warden said bullets are too good for children. Because only grown-ups get shot. Or they go into the gas. The children get thrown into the fire. Or killed by hand. Mostly, that is." She shrieks, losing her composure. "Sit down and stop talking dribble." I look over at the teacher, standing there shaking with anger. Standing there in front of the big blackboard, her hands still on her hips. My eyes begin to smart. And the big blackboard turns watery, gets bigger and bigger, until it surrounds the whole classroom and turns into a black sky. That is how injustice sounds, and that is how injustice feels. This is a story about a child who interprets the world based on what he knows, and a teacher who judges his answers based on what she does not know. We're each limited by what we don't know, and we're each limited by what others don't know. With knowledge comes understanding. With understanding comes tolerance. And with tolerance comes justice. And to have justice, we can never forget how the world looks to those who are vulnerable. My life started in a country where there had been no democracy, no rights, no justice. No one with this history does not feel lucky to be alive and free. No one with this history can take anything for granted. All it really takes to keep the fire lit under tolerance is the memory of the horror when it does not exist. So thank you, David Macau and the University of Ottawa, for the privilege of delivering this lecture and creating the public opportunity to reiterate to our children that we will do everything humanly possible to to keep the world safer for them than it was for their grandparents. A world where all children, regardless of race, religion, or gender, can wear their identities with pride and in peace. Thank you.